served in the circuit and district work in various locations in Canada. And for the last 2.5 years, they've been serving in the Brooklyn, New York, Bethel branch. Did I get that right? I believe I did. We have a fine presentation prepared for us. Brother Splane has chosen as his theme, Can You Wear the Coat of Samuel? So please let's give our undivided attention to Brother Splane.
You can't judge a book by its cover. Young people will often refer to this old proverb, especially when they want to adopt some fad, maybe dye their hair blue or do something a little bit different. And sometimes their parents object, and so they'll say, well, don't look at my hair, don't look at my clothes, look at me. You've got to look beyond this. And it's true. You can't judge a book by its cover. But we do have to concede that the cover of a book is all that most people will ever see. And so first impressions really are important. And that's why when we're in the ministry, or wherever we are, how we dress is so very important. But tonight we're not going to be talking about our literal clothes. But we're going to ask the question, can you wear Samuel's coat? Now, we do know a lot about Samuel. The scriptures provide quite a little biography of the man. We know that his folks came from a little place up in northern Ephraim called Ramathaim Zophim, mountain country. We know that his dad was a Levite. His mother was a very devout woman. And we know that for many years, Hannah, his mother, was unable to have children. And in Israel, for a woman not to be able to have children was considered not only to be of that woman. They took it that seriously. So, because Hannah was unable to have children, this was a real trial to her. A wrenching experience. And at one point, when she and her husband went up to Shiloh, where the tabernacle of Jehovah was, she took this concern of hers to Jehovah in prayer. They just had a big meal, the communion sacrifice, and there would be a few glasses of wine that would be consumed with the communion sacrifice. And then she stood in front of the sanctuary of Jehovah God. And she said to him, O Jehovah of armies, if you will without fail look upon the affliction of your slave girl and actually remember me, and you will not forget your slave girl and actually give to your slave girl a male offspring, I will give him to Jehovah all the days of his life, and no razor will come to be upon his head. And so she made a vow that if Jehovah God would give her a son, she would turn around and give the son back to him. Now, Hannah was praying, she was speaking, and her lips moving, but no sound was coming out. And the high priest, Eli, was nearby. And he watched her for a while. And without asking for any of the facts, he concluded that she must be drunk. So here you have this woman who feels so oppressed already, who is so downhearted. She wants a son. And she's approached by the high priest of Israel. And he says, how long will you go on acting like the drunken women? He says, put away your wine from before yourself. Can you imagine that? She was already in bad shape. And to have her motives questioned like that, this was adding insult to injury. And can you imagine Hannah replying, wow, look at that. That's the kind of elders we've got around here. It's going to be a frosty day in Nisan before I ever come back and worship at Jehovah's Tabernacle. I'm just going to go someplace else and start my own religion. Well, that wouldn't have been consistent, would it? After all, she'd just prayed to Jehovah God and asked Jehovah God to look upon her with favor. And how would it seem if she'd prayed to Jehovah God for favor and then she turned around and chewed out Jehovah's representative? That wouldn't be very consistent at all. And so very kindly and very tactfully, Hannah explained to the high priest, no, you have the wrong impression here. That's not what I was doing. And she explained to Eli what it was that brought her to the tabernacle. And then she and Elkanah, her husband, left. They went back home, and Jehovah heard her supplication. So sometime after that, she became pregnant, and she brought into the world a beautiful little boy that she called Samuel, name of God. And as was the custom, she began to nurse little Samuel, breastfeed him. And so obviously a bond would be created between the mother and the little baby. And in Israel, they used to breastfeed their children for quite some time, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5 years even. And so you can imagine that Samuel and Hannah must have developed a very, very close bond. But Hannah had made a vow to Jehovah. And she had said, if you will look with favor upon your slave girl, then I will give him to Jehovah all the days of his life. So, at some point, she was going to have to take Samuel up to the tabernacle and make good on the vow that she had made to Jehovah God. And so in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1 and verse 24, here's what the Bible says. It says, accordingly, just as soon as she had weaned him, she brought him up with her along with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a large jar of wine, and she proceeded to enter the house of Jehovah in Shiloh. And the boy was with her. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. With that she said, excuse me, my lord. Well, that's nice, isn't it? She's still calling him my lord. She's still very respectful. So after what Eli said to her, she didn't go back home to Ephraim and start bitterly going over and over and over and over and over in her mind the insult that high priest Eli had made. No. She says, excuse me, my lord. She says, by the life of your soul, my lord, I am the woman that was standing with you in this place to pray to Jehovah. It was with reference to this boy that I prayed that Jehovah should grant me my petition that I asked of him. And I, in my turn, have lent him to Jehovah. All the days that he does happen to be, he is one requested for Jehovah. And thereupon Hannah left Samuel there at Jehovah's tabernacle. And we can just visualize how she must have felt after having been with her son 3, 4, 5 years, to have to turn around and walk down the hill, leaving her little Samuel behind. She must have wept bitter tears. And what of Samuel? Here he is, just a little fellow, and he's left in the company of the high priest Eli, and he wasn't there to play. He was really there to learn to work at the age of 3, 4, 5 years of age. I see a lot of young children in the audience tonight. What would you think if your folks were to leave you here at the Kingdom Hall after they have to go home with me. That's really what it amounted to. Now, Eli had sons, but they weren't good in the truth. They were bad examples. And so it may be that really Samuel had no peers, no young people his own age, who really wanted to worship Jehovah God. And so the question is, what was Samuel going to do with the rest of his life? Was he going to balk at this arrangement? Was he going to go along with this arrangement? What was he going to do? And what do we think about what Hannah did? Do we think that this was a cruel thing for a mother to do? Leave her son in Jehovah's service when he was so young? After all, when you're a kid, aren't you supposed to enjoy life? Isn't that really the natural thing? Don't we want to get the best out of life? And sure, the truth is fine, but when you're young, you've got to kick up your heels a bit and enjoy life. Do we really think that Samuel was going to waste his life by doing what his mother had planned for him? Well, of course, he wouldn't have had a life at all, possibly, if Hannah had not made that vow to Jehovah God. So, Hannah had a perfect right to offer her son to Jehovah for Jehovah's service in this way. And notice, she didn't say, well, Jehovah, I'll let him pioneer for a year if you'll just grant my request. She was serious, wasn't she? All the days of his life. And not just that he would be in Jehovah's service, but she says, and no razor will ever touch his head. In other words, he was going to be one of those Nazarites that we sang about in our opening song. So no wine. He wouldn't cut his hair. He would have dietary restrictions, no raisins, no grapes, no olives. Just good, plain food. No frills. So you might say a forerunner of the Bethelites in some ways. This is what was reserved for Samuel. Well, all of that is very interesting, but doesn't tell us much about Samuel's coat. We're here to talk about, can you wear Samuel's coat? So where does that fit in? Well, it does, because according to chapter 2, Hannah used to visit Samuel from time to time, once a year. So here he was learning to work for Jehovah God. And in chapter 2 and verse 18, it says, and Samuel was ministering before Jehovah as a boy, having a linen ephod girded on, also a little sleeveless coat his mother would make for him. And she brought it up to him from year to year when she came up with her husband to sacrifice the yearly sacrifice. So once a year, Hannah would bring Samuel a present. She would go up to visit him where he was serving Jehovah. And what was the purpose of her visit? Was it to try and get Samuel to come back home and live a normal life? We miss you. Oh, we'd just love to have you come back home and help out the family a little bit. No, that wasn't the reason. She was going up there to encourage him to carry on in the full-time ministry that he had undertaken. And she brought him a present from year to year, a coat. Now, some of you sisters may have done some sewing for a growing boy. And if you're going to sew something that a growing boy is going to have to use for quite some time, what do you have to take into account? Well, you'll have to make it a little bit too big. Because you know that he's going to grow up and he's going to fill out. And as a result, if you make it the size he is today, why in a few months it's going to be no good. So she comes up from year to year. And so Hannah is going to have to make the coat that she gives to Samuel a little bit too big. The first time he puts it on, it's going to look silly. Won't fit. But what's going to solve the problem? He's going to grow. And as he grows, he's going to fill that coat out. Well, when we think of Hannah, who for so many years had no children, we do think of Jehovah's Universal Organization that for years and years and years had no spiritual sons either. We're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. And then, of course, at the time that Jesus came on the scene, her first spiritual son was born, 29 CE. Then thousands of others were added, and then the great crowd came in, and so now Jehovah's Heavenly Organization has many spiritual sons and many prospective grandsons. And isn't it true that just as Hannah would bring a coat for Samuel to wear, and that coat was a little bit too big to start with, isn't it true that Jehovah's Universal Organization, it does really the same thing to us today? You come to a knowledge of the truth. You start to study. And you realize pretty quick that you don't just come to the Kingdom Hall here to fill a seat. Because our religion is a religion of participation. When you come here, you are expected to participate. In fact, when we stop participating in the truth, we stop progressing, don't we? So, sometimes we begin to bargain a little bit. We start to study and we say, well, I don't mind studying with you people. I don't mind coming to the Watchtower study and the public talk, but you'll never, ever get me on the platform to give a student talk. And you will never get me to go from door to door. I just won't go. I'm not made for that kind of thing. So what does Hannah do? Well, after we've been studying a while, Jehovah's Organization comes up to us and says, hey, here's a coat for you to try on. I'd like you to give a talk on the ministry school. Come on, you can do it. Me? Never. I'd look ridiculous up there. I'd make a fool of myself. We figured that the coat was a little bit too big. So now we have a choice, don't we? Either we're going to continue to progress, or we're going to regress. Had a phone call on Friday from a man in another state, and this man was just being a little bit critical of his congregation that he was in. And so as I listened to him for a while, criticizing different things that were going on in the congregation, and really his criticisms didn't amount to anything, it became clear the reason why this man was critical. He had come to the point in his studies where he realized that he was going to have to make a few changes in his life. And he didn't want to have to change. And you could see that he was at the point where he was hoping against hope. The truth wasn't right after all, so he wouldn't have to put these coats on. He wouldn't have to look ridiculous. But isn't it true, friends, that the only way that we're going to progress in the truth is if we're willing to make ourselves look ridiculous sometimes. If we're willing to try something that we're not absolutely sure that we're going to be able to accomplish. But it really requires faith on our part to do what we have to do. Now for many, that's the way it is in the Theocrat Ministry School. Perhaps when you were real little, you had all kinds of nerve. And you could get up there and stand in front of the congregation with your little necktie all tight up at your shirt, and you could look out at everybody and just give a talk like a bullet, and it was perfect. Then you hit the teenage years. And during the teenage years, it becomes a lot more difficult to get up and do a lot of these things. Because in the teen years, we're so self-conscious. We're so conscious of the fact that we can get up there and blow it. We can make a real fool of ourselves. Reminds me of a brother we knew in Montreal, Canada. And the first talks that he gave in the ministry school. This brother, a real fine man, about 4'5", a real fighter in the door-to-door work. Now, the first time that man get up to give a talk in a ministry school, he looked out at the audience, he gripped the speaker stand, and froze. And he stood there like that for 5 minutes. You know how it is? The attendants weren't quite sure what they're supposed to do with this. Any minute now, he's going to be all right, and we aren't going to have to go up and make a scene, but he wasn't all right. And finally, 2 brothers had to get up there and literally pry his fingers away from the speaker stand and escort the poor brother off the platform. Now, would you say that the coat was a little bit too big? Looked a little bit ridiculous, of course. And can you imagine how that brother felt the next time he received an assignment? Well, he was determined that this was not going to lick him. And so he practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and worked and worked and worked and worked. And this time when he got up, he didn't freeze. He fainted dead away. He didn't even open his mouth. He just fainted right on the platform. And so now it was getting worse because at least 2 brothers before could take him off the platform. Now it took 4. 2 at his feet and 2 at his arms. Now can you imagine how that brother felt when he got his 3rd assignment? Would any of us have really blamed him if he had just said, listen, this is not working. There is no way that I can do this. I don't think any of us would blame this brother. But he practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced and worked and worked and worked and worked. And this time he got up and he got through his entire talk. Then he went out the side door and threw up. But he got through the whole talk. And that brother has been doing very well in giving talks. He even gives talks in circuit assemblies, district conventions today. But he had to be willing to put on that coat, even though he knew that it was not going to fit and that he was going to look a little bit ridiculous. But that's the way we progress. Sometimes at a dance, you might, somebody gets married, and so people go to this dance, and you might see the bashful young sister who goes to the dance, and an equally bashful young brother gets up his nerve to go over and ask her to dance. And she says, oh no, I couldn't. I don't know how to dance. And you know very well that she just loved to dance with the brother. But what's the problem? She is so afraid of making a fool of herself. Oh, I'd get it all wrong. I'd embarrass you. So he spends the entire number arguing with her. Before you know it, the music has stopped, and nobody's had a good time. Why? She was afraid to fail. And we just can't be afraid to fail. In missionary work, this was a problem. Sometimes we'd get missionaries, and our missionary home happened to be the training center for missionaries, and we'd bring them in and we'd teach them the language, and then we'd send them to different parts of the country. Sometimes you'd get a missionary who had a very, very high standard, personal standard. They were a perfectionist. And before they would say anything in French, it had to be perfect. And then we had missionaries who studied the language for 2 months. I remember 2 brothers in particular, 2 Danish brothers. They studied the language with us for 2 months, and at the end, I think they could say, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. And that was it. And they were always hungry and thirsty, those 2, but that's beside the point. They could not master the French language. But they got out there, and with about 11 words of French, they made friends with the people, they started Bible studies, and they started bringing people into the truth. And in fact, they did a lot better with the little bit of the language that they knew than some of the ones who had a much, much better command of the language. And so it may be that at times we're a little bit hesitant to put on another coat, such as going from door to door. You know, some people are terrified to go from door to door. And you know who are the worst? Salesmen. Brothers who are salesmen so often have a very, very hard time to go from door to door with the kingdom message. It's not the same product. Well, say when I go for my company, I go out there and I believe in this product and I use any technique that I can to sell. But now here I am going from door to door and I realize in advance the prejudice that there is and people have these ideas about the witnesses and so on. And so it takes a lot of faith on the part of some of these brothers to put on that coat. Now, if you have a fear of the door-to-door work, what are you going to do about it? Jehovah's organization says here, try on this coat. And what are you going to do? Are you going to put it in the clothes closet and say, no, as long as I don't try and put it on, as long as I don't think about this coat, I'll be all right. So maybe after the group you sneak off and do a return visit. Or maybe go across town and do an old Bible study. Who is studying, one of the Nephilim who was studying before the flood or something. And we do that instead of going from door to door. Well, friends, if we have a problem with some aspect of the ministry, if we have a coat that we don't want to put on because we're afraid, there's only one way to handle that. We just have to take that coat and we have to put it on. In other words, the brother or the sister who is a bit afraid of going from door to door should do a lot of door-to-door work. We have to put ourselves in a position where we're going to overcome this problem. You can't run away from it like Jonah. You've got to face it. You've got to do something about it. And brothers, it's quite a common thing for people to have this kind of a problem. It's quite a common thing for people to be afraid to get up and give a talk or be afraid to go from door to door because basically, isn't it true? Most of Jehovah's Witnesses are shy people. And really the only reason why we're doing all of the things that we're doing is Jehovah's Spirit. Some people just have a hard time meeting new people all the time. That was my problem. I got in the circuit work and all you do there is meet new people all the time. It's only Jehovah's Spirit that allows you to do these things. But the point is that you have to be willing to put yourself in that position. Young people at school. Here we are, January the 16th, 17th. How many of you, young folks, have told your friends at school that you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Sometimes our being a witness is a very carefully guarded secret. Now, nobody likes to be hassled. Nobody likes to be hassled. Everybody likes to be liked. That's normal. But now, here's a coat that Jehovah's organization offers us to put on. And yes, it's going to make us a little bit uncomfortable. It may make us a little bit uncomfortable at first. But if we put it on and do what Jehovah's organization says, we can have a real blessing. Reminds us of an experience that we heard from up Rochester way at a special assembly day. A young fellow by the name of Tim. Now Tim is 14 years of age, and he was on the platform at the special assembly day, and he was telling his experience. He was laughed at a lot by his fellow students because of being in the truth. And they used to call him Bible Boy. And many of you young people know what that's like. And so Tim wasn't feeling very good about this, obviously. Who does? But his teacher and his principal got together with his parents, and they said, now, how can we solve this problem? They said, well, why are the kids laughing at Tim? It must be because they really don't know very much about what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. So we're going to solve the problem. We're going to have Tim give a little talk of about 30 minutes to the class on Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's what they did. So Tim got a table up there, and he got his witnessing bag, his briefcase, book bag, put it up there. And he pulled everything out of his briefcase, and one by one he'd show the class what we do. what we have in the case. He pulled his songbook out of his briefcase and explained, now we have kingdom songs that we sing, we have our hymns, and then he pulled the greatest man who ever lived out. He showed the ministry school council slip. He says, I'm following a course in public speaking, and that's what helps me to get up in front of the class and give a little talk the way I'm doing to you. He explained the counsel and the good points and how you have to work on certain things and so on. And then he got to the Young People Ask book. And he says, now here is a book that really helps me whenever I have a question or a problem in my personal life. I turn to this Young People Ask book, and it's amazing the answers that there are in that book. Well, the class was fascinated. And out of 23 students, Tim placed 21 Young People Ask books. Now, the other two students, well, he was one. He had one. And the other student was a witness too, so he didn't need one. So that means that everybody who wasn't a witness got a Young People Ask book. Now, here was a very bad situation. He was getting tormented, teased because of the truth. You'd say this is a bunch of little barbarians, a bunch of little pagans. They're worthless, these kids. Look the way they're treating my son. But they all took books. And you know something? Tim isn't getting laughed at anymore. But you see, he had a problem. He had a coat to put on. And they said, now face your problem. We want you to get up there and look those kids in the eye. And you tell them what you believe. And he did. And he was blessed for it. So this is what we mean by putting on Samuel's coat. That we really, really, really want to face up to our problems or any assignment, any privilege, anything that we may have been avoiding. Some brothers, it may be being a servant. May have been in the truth for many years. And it may be that deliberately we've been avoiding taking on servants' responsibilities. So Jehovah's organization says, here, try this on. You'll fit into it. You'll grow spiritually, and it'll be all right. Now, as we said about Samuel, this was not easy for him. Go back to 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 12. And this is the environment in the congregation that Samuel had to put up with. Chapter 2 and verse 12. It says, now the sons of Eli were good-for-nothing men. They did not acknowledge Jehovah. And then the Bible tells us some of the things that these sons were doing. Look at verse 22. The depth of their immorality. Verse 22, it says, and Eli was very old, and he had heard of all that his sons kept doing to all Israel, and how they would lie down with the women that were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he used to say to them, why do you keep doing things like these? For the things I am hearing about you from all the people are bad. No, my sons, because the report is not good that I am hearing, but the people of Jehovah are causing to circulate. Now tell me, what was the difference between Eli as a parent and Hannah and Elkanah as a parent? Now, Eli was the high priest of Israel. Elkanah was a Levite in the congregation. He didn't have the stature of high priest. But now, what was the difference between Eli and Hannah and Elkanah? Well, Eli was a permissive parent, wasn't he? Now, it's a funny thing because Eli had no problem going up to Hannah and saying, you're drunk. You drunken woman. What's the matter with you? And he didn't even have all the facts. But when it came to his own kids, he couldn't bring himself to be firm. And imagine, here they are, lying down with the women that were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting, committing immorality. And he says, that's not nice. Naughty, naughty, naughty. You shouldn't be doing that. Whereas Elkanah and Hannah, he said, look, we've made a vow to Jehovah. We have promised our son to Jehovah, and we're not going to go back on that vow. And so they gave up Samuel, to Jehovah's service. Now, isn't that really the kind of attitude that parents need today when they're bringing up their children? In fact, one of the biggest weaknesses that we notice that parents have today, so often they teach their kids to work hard, but they don't teach them to work hard in the truth. They don't really teach them to make sacrifices for Jehovah. Well, we may have a child who, in the summertime, gets a part-time job working at McDonald's. And so, yes, when it's time to get up to go to work at McDonald's, we say, look, it's good for you. You go out there, you work, you're going to wash dishes, you're going to serve Big Macs and the whole works, and it's good for you. And what if the kid says, no, I don't want to go, Mom. I'm tired today. What does Mom say? Does she say, well, now, if it doesn't come from your heart, if you're really not motivated to work at McDonald's, then I'll just phone up the boss and tell him that you won't be in because, if you don't want to do it, there's no point in forcing yourself. Is that what Mom says? Never. She says, look, you signed the contract, not me. You get out there and you make those Big Macs. You get those Big Macs sliding down the counter. That's what she says. She's not afraid at all to make her son work for McDonald's. But now what do we do on Saturday morning if our son doesn't want to go out in the service? He goes, oh, Ma, I had a lot of homework last night, and I was up watching the basketball game, and I'm tired, and Saturday is the only day I have to rest. What then? Do we say, well, if it doesn't come from your heart, then you might as well not go, because after all, Jehovah's not going to accept it if it doesn't come from your heart. Friends, let's be realistic for a minute. As adults, do you always feel like getting up on Saturday morning and going out in the service? When it's 20 below, do you just wake up and say, oh boy, I can just hardly wait to get my toes into that snow and go out from door to door? Not always, no. There are times when we would much rather curl up and go back to sleep, isn't it true? So then, if we adults feel this way about the truth at times, or sometimes when it comes to meeting night, do you always feel like going to meetings? Did you really all feel like coming here tonight? There are times when we say, I am so tired. If I could sink into a nice hot bathtub and then curl up with a good book, that would be really nice. So if adults don't always feel like doing the right thing, what makes us think that young people are always going to be motivated to do the right thing? The Bible says that the heart is treacherous above all things. So since that's the case, there are times when we just have to force ourselves to do what we're supposed to do, because there's a job to be done. And the job isn't making Big Macs, no. But it's getting out there and preaching the good news of the kingdom. And whether we always feel like going or not is really immaterial. The point is, it needs to be done. And of course, as we accept that responsibility, as we accept that coat, and we get out there and do the work, we become more skillful at it. We can overcome the objections better, we're more at ease, and before you know it, we're really enjoying ourselves. Reminds me of a young brother, very bashful, very shy, in high school. And he was going out from door to door one Saturday morning, and who does he meet? And this is something that you youngsters dread, much as I used to dread it when I was growing up. Who did he meet? The most popular girl in the class. She saw him there with the Watchtower and Awake magazines. And she was not only the most popular girl in the class, but she also had the biggest mouth in the class. And so he knew that Monday morning he was dead. He knew that Monday morning everybody was going to know that he had been at her door with the Watchtower and Awake. So he went to school. He set foot in the schoolyard, and sure enough, he hadn't gotten more than a few feet of what somebody called out, "Hey, Scott, I hear you were at Brenda's house on Saturday with the Watchtower." Quick as a flash, he says, "That's right. And you're next on my list." So you see, he planned, he prepared what he was going to do, and he was not going to back off. He picked up that coat and he put it on. He made up his mind he wasn't going to slink around like some little whipped puppy. And as a result, he was able to be respected. And that's really part of growing up in school in the truth. You have to learn to look people in the eye and be proud of the fact that you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so if you find that your parents sometimes are a little bit rough on you when it comes to the truth, and they make you study when you don't feel like studying, and they make you go to meetings, even though you have homework, and they say, you got homework, you're going to do the homework after the meeting, but you're not missing the meetings for the homework, and they make you get up on Saturday morning and go out when you don't always feel like it, you thank God for those parents. Because Eli was not like that. And look what his sons turned out to be. And this is something that single parents can keep in mind too. Sometimes in our congregations we have sisters, perhaps, who are raising their kids alone. They don't have the benefit of the husband, the firmness of the man. But if there are any sisters in that situation, you be just as firm. And you don't let your kids away with missing meetings and missing field service and the rest. And it's interesting when you get talking to members of the Bethel family, pioneers, special pioneers, we have noticed over the years that by far the highest percentage of those who go on to Bethel, regular pioneering, special pioneering, by far the highest percentage are those who were raised by single parents. Either one parent is disfellowshipped, there was a divorce, someone was deceased, a separation, something, by far the highest percentage. And perhaps one of the reasons is they don't have two salaries coming in, so they learn to budget. They don't have expensive tastes. Life becomes a little bit more black and white. It's either or. They have choices to make in life, and so they make them. And so we find that many of our very, very fine Bethelites and pioneers have been raised by just mom or dad. So Eli, what was his problem here? Eli loved his boys, but he didn't see his boys the way Jehovah God saw them. Now how did Jehovah see his sons? Verse 25. Eli is finishing his talk with his sons here, and he says, if a man should sin against a man, God will arbitrate for him, but if it is against Jehovah that a man should sin, who is there to pray for him? Now notice this. But they would not listen to the voice of their father, because Jehovah was now pleased to put them to death. So Eli didn't see those boys the way Jehovah saw them. Jehovah looked at those boys and he said, I'm going to put them to death. Spiritually speaking, they are nothing. But Eli, he just couldn't see the principle that way. And isn't that a problem that so many of us have today? We have to learn to see people the way Jehovah sees them. And when you see someone as Jehovah sees him, that's the definition of a spiritual man, isn't it? So sometimes we have to admit we're not a spiritual person. Why do we have problems sometimes with young sisters who date a worldly boy? They met a worldly boy at work. And they say, he's got awfully nice manners. He's so polite and well brought up. He almost never curses. He's a real gentleman. He respects me. He brings me roses. What's the problem? The sister does not see that worldly boy as Jehovah sees him. Now maybe someday he's going to come into the truth and be a brother. But he's not a brother right now. And so it's a matter of seeing people the way Jehovah God sees them. And this was something that Eli was unable to do. And as a result, it ended up with his undoing, the undoing of his sons, and finally the death of every single one of them. Well, what was the result of this situation in Israel? Samuel was prospering. Eli's sons, Jehovah had written them off. He was ready to put them to death. And in chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, all the while, the boy Samuel was ministering to Jehovah before Eli, and word from Jehovah had become rare in those days. There was no vision being spread abroad. Well, that's what happens, doesn't it, when there's wrongdoing in a congregation and it's not attended to. In this case, Eli's sons were doing what was wrong in Jehovah's eyes. Eli knew about it, and as a result, Jehovah was withdrawing his blessing from the congregation. And so it says that vision from Jehovah had become rare, and there was no vision being spread abroad. Now it came about on that day that Eli was lying in his place, and his eyes had begun to grow dim. He was not able to see. And the lamp of God was not yet extinguished, and Samuel was lying in the temple of Jehovah, where the ark of God was. And Jehovah proceeded to call Samuel. Now, Josephus tells us that Samuel was probably 12 years old at this time. And can you imagine this? Of the 3 million men and women in Israel, Jehovah decides that he is now going to break his silence, and he is now going to come into contact with one Israelite. And whom does he choose? A 12-year-old boy. So that tells us something, doesn't it? It tells us that Jehovah does take an interest in what you are doing. Maybe you're 12, 13, 14 years of age. And what I'm told is that the congregation is pretty proud of the young people that they have here. I understand that we have a very, very fine group of young people. Well, if Jehovah could pick that one 12-year-old boy out of 3 million people, that means that Jehovah takes a real interest in what young people are doing. He could have chosen anybody, but he chose Samuel. And so it says that Jehovah began calling Samuel. And in verse 4, it says, "At this, he said, 'Here I am.'" He thought it was Eli. "And he went running to Eli and saying, 'Here I am, for you called me.' He said, 'I did not call. Lie down again.' So he went and lay down. And Jehovah went on to call yet again, 'Samuel.' At this, Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you did call me.' And he said, 'I did not call, my son. Lie down again.' As regards Samuel, he had not yet come to know Jehovah, and the word of Jehovah had not yet begun to be revealed to him. So Jehovah called again for the 3rd time, 'Samuel.' At that he got up and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you must have called me.' And Eli began to discern that it was Jehovah that was calling the boy. Consequently, Eli said to Samuel, 'Go, lie down. And it must occur that if he should call you, you must say, "Speak, Jehovah, for your servant is listening." So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And this time Jehovah came to him, and he proclaimed the judgment that he was going to execute on the house of Eli. And then he required this young Samuel to go back and report to Eli. So he was now using Samuel as his mouthpiece. Well, in our modern organization, Jehovah has used young men at times to get his will across. When we think of it, Brother Russell was only 18 years of age when he first started his Bible study group. And it took a lot of courage. There were a lot of much older men who had very strong ideas about the Scriptures and who were deathly opposed to what Brother Russell and his study group were discovering from the Bible, and yet they continued, they persisted. And look what a tremendous organization has grown from that. And when you read the Bible throughout the history of the Bible, Jehovah has always had a real keen interest in what young people can do. Witness to this man. And you know how 4-year-olds are. Sometimes the first thing they want to know is if they're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So she asks Rick, the carpet layer, she says, Rick, do you celebrate Christmas? He says, of course I celebrate Christmas. I can witness to this one. So Danielle says, well, Rick, do you like animals? He says, of course I like animals. Animals are great. She says, well, would you like to live in the paradise forever with all the animals? And Rick says, that sounds good to me. Well, she says, you'll never make it if you keep celebrating Christmas. You've got to do something about this. Well, this got Rick curious. And so he started to ask her parents what this was all about. And they started a Bible study with him. So now here you have a little girl who's speaking out about the truth, and already at the ripe old age of 4, she's been instrumental in starting a Bible study. Now this kind of experience we hear over and over and over again. Because people are not content with the status quo. They want to progress. They hear counsel from the platform. They want to apply it. They're nervous about it. They don't think they could make it maybe, but they're going to try it. And as a result, they get a blessing. Now, since January of last year, the Kingdom Ministry reminded us that on Saturday mornings we can do what? We can read the Bible when we go from door to door. Now, for many of us, we'd have to admit that we didn't really get a chance to use the Bible very much, because on Saturday mornings, it was usually a 30 to 60 second presentation. That's the way we did it with the magazines before. Well, of course, that's a year ago now. So the question is, what are we doing on Saturday mornings? Are we still using a 30 to 60 second presentation? Jehovah's organization has been holding that coat for us to try on for a year now. And her arms are getting pretty tired. We've got to pick up that coat, and we've got to try it on. And the beautiful thing about that is that even our young folks, 10, 11, 12 years old, they can read a Bible scripture to people and talk to them a little bit before they offer the magazines or a tract. And so you're learning to use the Bible in the ministry. And this is such a delightful experience. So the long and the short of it is this. You select something that you know you should be doing, that you've been avoiding. And you say, before the week is out, I am going to take that coat up. And I don't care if I look ridiculous. I am going to work on this point that I've been avoiding. And I'm going to keep working and working and working on it. And growing and growing and growing until finally the coat fits. So Jehovah's organization has a coat with your name on it. Try it on. And don't take it off if at first it doesn't fit too well. Because you can wear Samuel's coat.